The LS-1000 was a diesel-electric switcher built by the Lima Hamilton Corporation between 1949 and 1950. Lima had been a major locomotive manufacturer in the steam era, but they had not been able to keep up with the times. They merged with Baldwin at the end of 1950, and the combined company ceased locomotive production altogether in 1956. This model was commissioned by student brakeman Ben Sawyer of the Whitewater Valley Railroad, which currently owns and operates the last remaining LS-1000, originally Armco Steel Corporation 709, and the prototype for this build. Most people seem to prefer clean implementations, but Ben wanted to depict the 709 as it exists today. I'd never weathered something based on an actual weathered prototype, but as usual, the low shape and color resolution of LEGO can only cartoon most of the fine weathering details. I think the end result is perhaps better than the H1044 and perhaps worse than the Trinity gondolas, mostly thanks to the brick-built bogies and studs-out hood, respectively. Speaking of the hood, I felt that a layer of offset plates and tiles better represented the access panels than the tile pattern on the FM. But it also makes said hood very wide, closer to 6 studs than 4. I addressed the corner problems on the cab with tiles, rounded to represent the rounded windows that get partially covered by other windows. Overall, the 2 blocks on a board body doesn't have that much to write home about, though. The unrelated trick is in the drivetrain design. Short-length locomotives with high hoods, like the HH-1000, can have vertically mounted motors with a battery box in between. But similarly sized locomotives with short height hoods, like the LS-1000, must have horizontally mounted motors with no room for a battery box in between. 4-bar linkage addressed this issue on the MP15 by only powering one bogie with one motor. Unfortunately, this disproportionately reduces the driven weight because the relatively heavy battery box ends up over the unpowered axles. Powering both bogies with that one motor seems to require passing axles through the battery box, but what if there was another way? In the T1, I synchronized the 2 sets of driven axles with a flexible connection. I had long ago thought about doing this for bogie locomotives, but I had always assumed that the bogies would pivot too far. While the link between the T1 drivers needs one joint, the link between 2 regular bogies needs 2 joints, and the link needs to stretch further when the bogies pivot in opposite directions, mostly in S-bends. If the turns are too sharp or the bogies too far apart, the link can come undone. The sliding end of the CV joint only allows for less than a stud and a half of travel. That being said, there is a subset of bogie geometries where the bogies are far enough apart to accommodate the 2 flexible joints, but close enough together to keep the link together. The LS-1000 conveniently falls inside this envelope, even with respect to R40 geometry. In practice, I actually encountered a different problem. The longitudinal axles have little to no force pressing them into their respective bevel gears when the bogies pivot. This can allow the bevel gears to walk their way off the axles when pulling heavy loads through corners. Using new parts seemed to alleviate this issue, but not before I tried to secure a CV joint with a fixture made of sausages. Like most of my commissioned builds, this model uses not PF components as a matter of economy. With not PF motors provably more powerful than their PF counterparts, I originally wanted to drive both bogies with a 1-to-1 gear ratio, but 3-to-5 ultimately sounded less taxing. Somehow, the 630-gram locomotive managed to pull close to 270 grams, surprisingly high for something of this weight. The similarly heavy HH-1000 only managed 230 grams. Operationally, the top of the hood comes off in 2 parts to access the battery box. Depending on how nicely the cables are folded, the hood sections may need stud connections, which may make them annoying to pull off. The battery box seats only with gravity, resting on panels that lower it 1 LU below the frame. This allows the hood panels to connect to the battery box and sit flush with the 5-stud high sides. More recently, there may be another more conventional solution to the low hood short locomotive problem: 28-tooth gears. These are big enough to go around a 3-wide motor, but small enough to go in a 4-wide space, which might allow placing horizontal motors directly over bogies with sufficient drivetrain reinforcement. I don't have enough of these gears to test anything right now, but perhaps in a future build. Anyway, I was very curious about implementing the 1-motor, 2-bogie thing after the T1, so the LS-1000 was a great opportunity. If you want to commission something, contact me on social media. See the video description. Please consider subscribing if you like what we do, and have a nice day.